The planet of Zithera had always been known for its beauty, its sprawling cities of silver towers, and the gentle glow of its twin suns that bathed everything in golden light. But now, that beauty was under threat. The once peaceful world had turned into a place of fear, desperation, and chaos. The alien inhabitants, who called themselves the Elysians, had lived for centuries in harmony, developing incredible technologies and building a society that prized knowledge, creativity, and community. Their cities were marvels of architecture, their machines powered by energies no one else in the galaxy could harness. Yet all of this was now in jeopardy. A ruthless enemy known as the Varkari had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. They were merciless conquerors, driven by hunger for territory and destruction. Entire cities had fallen in days, leaving smoldering ruins where laughter and life once thrived. The Elysians tried to fight back with their advanced weapons and defensive shields. But the Varkari were stronger and more cunning than anyone had imagined. Reports came in from the front lines of cities under siege, families trapped, energy grids failing, and communication lines cut off. Panic spread quickly. Elysians who had never imagined a life of fear found themselves hiding in the shadows, scavenging for supplies, and wondering if anyone would come to save them. Among the Elysians, leaders debated their options. The planet had always kept its distance from the wider galaxy, confident in its own defenses, but the current crisis left no choice. Help did not arrive soon. Zithera would be lost forever. The Elysians knew of other intelligent species in distant galaxies. Some peaceful, some dangerous, but the hope of aid rested on reaching someone powerful enough to make a difference. And so, a decision was made, one that would change everything. A distress signal would be sent. The Elysians prepared the signal in the largest communication chamber they had, a massive hall filled with instruments and devices that could send messages across light years. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, ensuring that the transmission could travel the vast expanse of space without distortion or interception. Every calculation mattered, for failure could mean that no one would ever see the cry for help. They encoded every detail: the Varkari's movements, the cities under attack, the population in need, and the urgency of their plight. The message was not just a call for assistance, it was a vivid picture of a civilization on the edge of annihilation. As the final commands were entered, Elysians gathered in the chamber, watching nervously as the signal powered up. The room hummed with energy, the air thick with tension. This moment carried more than hope. It carried desperation, fear, and the weight of an entire species' survival. Outside, the skies over the capital flickered with strange light as the signal shot into space, a golden beam piercing the darkness, stretching farther than any Elysian had ever imagined. For hours, they waited. Days passed. There was no response. Rumors and fears began to swirl among the population. Had the signal been received? Would anyone come? Or was Zithera doomed to fall without a single ally? Families clung to each other, and children asked questions no adult had answers for. The Elysians struggled to maintain calm and hope, knowing that panic could spread as quickly as the Varkari forces. Yet, in the silent expanse of deep space, far beyond Zithera's twin suns and beyond the gaze of any Elysian eye, the distress signal traveled. It passed planets, stars, and nebulae, moving steadily across countless light years. It carried the fear, courage, and hope of a civilization in peril. And it eventually reached ears that had never heard of Zithera before, ears belonging to a species whose reputation alone could strike terror into the hearts of entire galaxies. These were the Deathworlders, a legendary force known across space for their military might and unmatched strategic skill. Their leaders immediately sensed the gravity of the situation, understood the desperation embedded in the signal, and the risk to a civilization on the brink of destruction. Back on Zithera, life went on in small, fragile ways. The Varkari's attacks continued, cities still burned, but the Elysians held on to the hope that the signal might have reached someone. Scientists worked tirelessly, trying to improve defenses with limited resources. Soldiers patrolled the streets, weary but determined, standing between their people and annihilation. Families shared stories, meals, and moments of laughter wherever they could. fighting to keep the light of life alive amid encroaching darkness. Every day was a battle, not only against the Varkari, but against despair itself. The distress signal had done its job, reached far beyond Zethera, beyond any planet, beyond any star system that the Elysians had ever known. Whether help would come, and what kind of help it would be, remained uncertain. But in that moment, as Elysians clung to each other and prepared for the worst, a small, fragile ember of hope had been lit. The signal was no longer just a message. It was a lifeline, a plea for survival that had set in motion events that would soon bring forces no one could have imagined. The story of Zethera at that moment was one of fear and hope, of desperation and courage. The Elysians had done everything they could, but now their fate rested on the response of beings far beyond their understanding. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, the Deathworlders had seen the call, and the first threads of an unimaginable chain of events had begun. In the hearts of the Elysians, hope mingled with fear, knowing that salvation might come, but it might come in a way they could never predict. And so, the stage was set for an encounter that would change everything. A story of survival, courage, and forces beyond comprehension. The cries of a desperate civilization had traveled across galaxies, and the universe was about to respond. Asterisk, far beyond the reaches of Zethera, or in a part of the galaxy where stars were fewer and space itself seemed darker and colder. The signal from the desperate Elysians finally arrived. It pierced through the void, a beacon of urgency that demanded attention, and it found its way to the Deathworlders. These beings were unlike anything else in the known universe. Legend spoke of them as warriors of unparalleled strength, intellect, and strategy, feared by countless civilizations and respected even by the most powerful. Their reputation was enough to make entire fleets reconsider battle before a single shot was fired. The Deathworlders were not merely soldiers. They were a disciplined species, trained for survival and victory in the harshest conditions imaginable. From birth, they were taught to adapt, to endure, and to conquer challenges that would destroy lesser beings. Their society operated like a living machine, each individual knowing their role with perfect clarity. From the high-ranking commanders to the engineers maintaining their immense warships, every action was precise, every decision calculated, and every moment accounted for. They were a species that thrived on discipline. Their presence alone could shift the balance of power across galaxies. When the signal reached them, the Deathworlders. Leaders convened in their central command chamber, a space that radiated authority and control. Holographic images of distant star systems flickered in the air, showing the vast expanses of space, the orbits of planets, and the faint outline of Zethera far away. The message had been clear: a civilization in peril, facing a merciless enemy and desperately seeking aid. The urgency embedded in the signal was unmistakable, and the Deathworlders recognized both the opportunity and the responsibility. Though they were known for their fearsome military campaigns, they also adhered to a code: those in true need, when reaching across the void with honesty and desperation, could expect the intervention of the Deathworlders. The decision to respond was swift and unwavering. Orders were issued immediately, and the massive fleet of Deathworlders began preparations. The fleet itself was a marvel, ships designed not only for speed and maneuverability, but also for enduring the most dangerous conditions in space. Each vessel carried not only weapons of unimaginable power, but also the tools and resources needed to stabilize and protect a civilization in need. Engineers and strategists worked in perfect unison, coordinating the complex logistics required for a mission of this scale. They had no room for error. In space, mistakes could be fatal. As the fleet prepared to depart, the atmosphere among the Deathworlders was electric, but not chaotic. Unlike most species, panic or uncertainty had no place here. Knew their role and embraced it with unwavering commitment. Soldiers ran through drills, ensuring that every maneuver was rehearsed to perfection. Pilots checked their crafts repeatedly, running simulations against potential threats they might face en route. Scientists and strategists mapped out Zethera's planetary system, analyzing possible enemy positions and vulnerabilities. Even those who did not take part in combat played critical roles in sustaining the fleet. From maintaining energy supplies to ensuring communications remained secure across millions of kilometers. The journey to Zithera would not be simple. The Deathworlders had to traverse regions of space that were dangerous and largely uncharted. Cosmic storms could tear through ships, asteroids could crush entire squadrons, and rogue alien factions might see the fleet as an opportunity for conflict. Yet the Deathworlders embraced these dangers. To them, space was not merely a void, but a battlefield where preparation and skill determined survival. Every obstacle was anticipated and countered before it could become a threat, showcasing the unmatched capability of these legendary beings. As the fleet launched into the darkness, the signal from Zithera continued to reach them, a constant reminder of the lives depending on their arrival. In a way, the message had a dual effect. It was both a call for help and a test. The Deathworlders had long learned to interpret the subtle cues in distress signals, understanding the depth of despair, the urgency, and the potential consequences of inaction. In this case, they understood that time was critical, that every hour wasted could cost countless lives. Their movement became more than a journey. It became a mission defined by precision, urgency, and purpose. On board the ships, individuals reflected on the gravity of what lay ahead. Though the Deathworlders were trained to be fearless, even the most seasoned warriors felt the weight of responsibility. Every soldier understood that the aliens awaiting help were vulnerable, their hope was fragile, and that failure was not an option. Conversations among the crew were brief, focused on tactics, logistics, and potential strategies. There was no room for doubt, only clarity of purpose. The Deathworlders thrived in this clarity. Their ability to function as a unified organism, with each member contributing to the collective goal, was a key factor that made them unmatched across the galaxy. Meanwhile, across the vast distance separating the Deathworlders and Zithera, subtle cosmic phenomena interacted with the fleet's journey. Fields of energy, remnants of dying stars, and gravitational anomalies tested their navigation systems. Minor skirmishes with opportunistic space creatures tested their readiness. But these were swiftly dealt with using efficiency and minimal energy. Each encounter was a rehearsal, a preparation, a reminder of what awaited them upon arrival, a planet under siege. An enemy, ruthless in its pursuit of destruction, and a civilization hanging by the thinnest thread of hope. The anticipation within the fleet grew as they neared Zithera. Holographic displays continuously updated positions of the Varkari forces, showing cities on fire and energy shields flickering under attack. The Deathworlders' commanders analyzed every detail, adjusting strategies in real time. They were preparing not just for battle, but for an entire campaign that would require precision, strength, and a calculated approach to ensure the survival of a species that had called for their help. The magnitude of the operation was immense, yet it was met with unwavering confidence. To the Deathworlders, this was what they had trained for. A mission that defined their existence as the ultimate protectors and warriors of the galaxy. As Zithera grew closer on their sensors, the Deathworlders considered the psychological state of the Elysians, a civilization in fear, facing annihilation, likely desperate for any sign of hope. They knew that the arrival of their fleet not only shift the physical balance of power, but also affect morale in profound ways. The Elysians needed to see strength, decisiveness, and certainty in action. The Deathworlders planned their approach accordingly, tending to make an impression that would be unforgettable. A demonstration of power to inspire hope and strike fear into the enemy simultaneously. In essence, is a journey of preparation, discipline, and anticipation. It's a story of a legendary species responding to a desperate call. Not just with force, but with intelligence, precision, and purpose. The Deathworlders' arrival was not merely a reaction. It was a carefully orchestrated sequence of decisions, training, and action that highlighted their unmatched capability. And as they continued their journey through the void, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see the moment when hope and fear would collide on the surface of Zithera, changing the fate of a civilization forever. The Deathworlders' fleet moved through the darkness of space like a living, breathing organism. Every ship in the formation maintained perfect alignment, engines humming with power, shields glowing faintly as they cut through the void. Zathera was still far away, a small dot on the sensors, but the urgency of the mission made every moment critical. Space was vast, empty, and dangerous. Even for a species like the Deathworlders, the journey was not simple. There were cosmic storms, asteroid belts, and rogue gravitational waves that could easily tear a vessel apart if not navigated with precision. Yet this fleet was legendary for a reason. Every obstacle was calculated, every risk weighed, and every contingency planned. As the fleet entered a particularly treacherous sector, a dense field of asteroids stretched for millions of kilometers. Some of the rocks were massive, tumbling silently through the void, while others were small but deadly, traveling at speeds that could puncture a hull in seconds. Pilots maneuvered their ships with extraordinary skill, adjusting speed, trajectory, and shields in real time. Engineers monitored energy outputs to ensure that weapon systems and propulsion were fully operational, while sensors scanned for the tiniest deviations in the field. Even the slightest miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. Yet the Deathworlders handled it with calm efficiency, their training and experience allowing them to navigate what would have been impossible for most species as they moved deeper into the asteroid field. The first signs of danger beyond natural hazards appeared. Rogue space creatures, drawn to the energy signatures of the fleet, began to swarm. They were unlike anything the Elysians could have imagined, massive, shadowy forms with tentacles that glowed faintly, eyes that seemed to see into the minds of approaching ships. Minor skirmishes erupted, with the creatures striking at the fleet from multiple angles. Weapons fired, energy shields flared, and the creatures were quickly repelled. But even these small encounters reminded the crew that space was not empty. It was alive with threats, and the Deathworlders had to remain vigilant inside the ships. The mood was tense but controlled. The Deathworlders were a disciplined species, and fear had no place among them. Instead, there was focus, concentration, and a sense of purpose that bound the fleet together. Commanders communicated constantly, relaying updates, adjusting tactics, ensuring that every vessel maintained formation. Pilots spoke in precise, clipped tones, while engineers and scientists monitored the environment, scanning for hazards and ensuring that the fleet's systems remained at peak efficiency. Even those not directly involved in navigation or combat contributed, performing tasks that ensured the success of the mission. Every member understood their role, and the cohesion of the fleet was a testament to the rigor of their training. Days passed, and the journey continued. Space itself seemed to test the Deathworlders' patience and endurance. Cosmic storms erupted unexpectedly, waves of energy tearing through sectors, threatening to knock ships off course. Navigational systems were pushed to their limits, with calculations made in milliseconds to adjust for gravitational anomalies and radiation surges. Yet, despite these challenges, the fleet pressed forward. Their focus never wavered, their coordination never faltered, and their determination never diminished. Every obstacle encountered on the journey was met with discipline and precision, reinforcing their reputation as a force unmatched in the galaxy. Meanwhile, distant reports from Zathera continued to reach the fleet via the distress signal. The Elysians' fear and desperation were palpable even across the vast distances of space. Cities were still under attack, and the Varkari forces were relentless. Energy shields faltered and civilian casualties mounted. Every new update reminded the Deathworlders of the stakes, reinforcing the urgency of their mission. This was not a training exercise or a routine patrol. It was a race against time to prevent the annihilation of an entire civilization. As the fleet approached the outer edges of Zathera's star system, new dangers emerged. Debris from destroyed cities and spaceports had been ejected into orbit, creating hazardous fields that could damage ships. The Varkari, aware that reinforcements might arrive, had begun deploying scouts and interceptors, attempting to disrupt any incoming help. Minor skirmishes broke out, with the Deathworlders engaging with precision and efficiency, neutralizing threats before they could escalate. Every maneuver was calculated to conserve resources while maintaining maximum offensive and defensive capability. Despite the constant challenges, the journey also offered moments of awe and reflection. Crew members gazed at distant nebulae, stars being born and dying in brilliant displays of color and energy. Even the Deathworlders, who were trained for war and survival above all else, could not help but marvel at the scale and beauty of the universe. These moments were brief, but they reminded everyone that the mission was not just about destruction or combat. It was about survival, protection, and the fragile hope of an entire species.
As the fleet drew closer to Zethera, tension within the ships grew. Sensors began picking up the faint outlines of the planet, and the glow of fires on its surface became visible even across the void. Reports of Varkai activity were more frequent, and the destruction they had caused became evident in the data feeds. The Deathworlders adjusted their approach, preparing for the most critical phase of the mission: first contact with a civilization in crisis, and immediate engagement with a formidable enemy. Commanders ran simulations, rehearsing every possible scenario, ensuring that every ship and soldier knew their role in the operation that would soon begin. Inside the lead ships, senior officers discussed the strategy for landing or engagement. The Deathworlders did not act recklessly. Every decision was calculated. They considered the alien population's safety, the Varkari's strengths and weaknesses, and the geography of the planet itself. The goal was clear: neutralize the threat, protect the vulnerable, and establish control in a way that minimized further destruction. The Elysian survival depended not only on the Deathworlders' power but also on their ability to act with precision and intelligence. Finally, as the outer edge of Zethera's atmosphere came into view, the fleet slowed slightly, adjusting formation for descent and engagement. The planet below was scarred, cities smoldering, energy grids flickering, and citizens scrambling for shelter. The Varkari had underestimated the possibility of reinforcements, and their forces were scattered but still dangerous. The Deathworlders prepared for the first strikes, their weapons systems calibrated, and shields at maximum. Every soldier, pilot, and officer was ready for the moment when their mission would shift from preparation to action. The journey through space had been perilous, testing every skill, every decision, and every ounce of discipline within the fleet, but the Deathworlders had persevered, demonstrating why they were feared and respected across galaxies. Every obstacle faced, every encounter overcome, had prepared them for this exact moment. They were approaching Zethera not as a single force but as an unstoppable, unified presence, ready to confront both the enemy and the challenges of saving a civilization on the brink of destruction. The story of this phase of the mission is one of endurance, precision, and anticipation. The Deathworlders' journey through the void was more than travel. It was a test of skill, patience, and focus. Each challenge encountered strengthened their resolve and honed their readiness for the decisive moment to come. And as they closed in on the entire fleet and the galaxy itself was poised for the confrontation that would determine the fate of an entire species, where hope, courage, and fear would collide in a battle unlike any other. The moment the Deathworlders' fleet reached the outer atmosphere of Zethera, the scale of what lay before them became painfully clear. From space, the planet appeared as a globe scarred with destructions. It is reduced to glowing embers, smoke rising from once great towers, and rivers of energy flickering as power grids failed. The Valkyrie forces were spread thin, patrolling the ruins, searching for any remaining pockets of resistance. To the Elysians, the arrival of the fleet was both a blessing and a terrifying revelation. Their legends of the Deathworlders had always been distant tales, stories of beings so powerful they could annihilate entire civilizations with ease. Now, those legends were descending upon them, and they were about to witness firsthand the might of a species that operated on a level beyond comprehension. The fleet entered the upper atmosphere with precision unmatched by any other known species. Each vessel descended methodically, shields pulsating and weapons systems active. Yet there was a discipline that prevented chaos. Unlike other fleets that might rush in, risking collisions or inefficient maneuvers, the Deathworlders moved like a single organism. Ships adjusted in real time, avoiding debris from destroyed buildings and responding to shifting gravitational anomalies. As the Elysians observed from their hidden shelters and damaged observation posts, the first feeling was fear. These beings were enormous, their ships unlike anything Zethera had ever seen, with angular metallic frames that shimmered under the twin suns' light. But alongside fear, there was the Elysians realized that the legends they had heard were true. Salvation had arrived, but in a form that demanded respect and caution. The first engagement began almost immediately. Valkyrie scouts, noticing the approaching fleet, attempted to challenge the Deathworlders, launching small strikes to disrupt formation and buy time for their ground forces. The response was swift and devastating. Energy blasts cut through the small attack ships before they could reach the fleet, neutralizing the threat without hesitation. The Deathworlders' targeting systems were precise, calculating trajectories in milliseconds and firing with efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. Yet, despite their overwhelming power, the Deathworlders maintained restraint, avoiding unnecessary destruction of Zethera itself. Their goal was clear: protect the Elysians and eliminate the Valkyrie threat, not to flatten the planet. As the fleet continued its descent, the Elysians began to understand the scale of what was happening. Soldiers and civilians who had been hiding from the Valkyrie cautiously observed the maneuvers, noting the elegance and efficiency of the Deathworlders' actions. Large ground forces, once overwhelming the Elysians, were systematically targeted, disabled, or captured with minimal risk to the inhabitants. Advanced drones deployed from the fleet moved with lightning speed, neutralizing explosives, securing strategic positions, and cutting off escape routes for the Valkyrie. The Elysians had never seen anything like it. It was as if a storm of unstoppable power had entered their skies, yet it was controlled, precise, and calculated. On the ground, panic among the Valkyrie was spreading. Their strategy had been predicated on fear and overwhelming numbers. Now, they faced a force that was beyond their comprehension, a fleet that could strike anywhere, at any time, with perfect accuracy. Communications among their ranks faltered, and confusion took hold. They attempted to regroup, to mount a counterattack, but the Deathworlders anticipated every move. Using advanced predictive algorithms, they positioned their ships to intercept any offensive maneuvers, cutting off escape routes and isolating Valkyrie units. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, it was already too late. In parallel, the Elysians witnessed another side of the Deathworlders' strategy and assessment. Observing the situation from space, the fleet's commanders analyzed the planet's condition, marking safe zones, strategic points, and areas needing immediate intervention. Sensors scanned for trapped civilians, compromised structures, and potential hazards. Deployment drones were sent to rescue survivors, clear debris, and reinforce weakened defenses. The Elysians began to grasp that the Deathworlders were not mindless warriors. They were tacticians, protectors, and organizers, operating on a scale they had never imagined. Their fear began to mix with hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, their civilization could survive. As the engagement intensified, the Valkyrie made desperate attempts to push back. They sent their elite fighters to engage the fleet, hoping sheer aggression could disrupt the Deathworlders' precision. But even in combat, the Deathworlders remained unfazed. Their ships moved like clockwork, each strike calculated, each defense flawless. Enemy craft were neutralized before they could approach the planet's surface, and larger units were contained or disabled using non-lethal methods designed to preserve infrastructure. The Elysians watched in amazement as their enemies' greatest strengths were rendered useless against a force that anticipated every move, corrected every mistake, and acted with relentless precision. Amid the chaos, the Deathworlders also made their presence felt psychologically. From their ships, massive holographic projections were projected across the battlefield, demonstrating their immense size, power, and tactical superiority. These projections caused fear and hesitation among Valkyrie forces while reassuring Elysians that help had arrived. The psychological impact was as important as the physical presence. The Valkyrie began to retreat, disorganized and demoralized, while the Elysians found a renewed sense of courage, emerging from shelters to reclaim their cities with guidance from Deathworlder squads. The fleet's strategy continued to unfold with relentless efficiency. Key enemy strongholds were surrounded and neutralized, and smaller units were corralled into isolated pockets. Supply lines for the Valkyrie were cut, preventing reinforcements from reaching the front lines. Energy shields were deployed to protect civilian zones, while drones repaired critical infrastructure damaged during the attacks. Every action was deliberate, ensuring that Zithara's cities were preserved as much as possible. Even as the enemy forces were systematically dismantled, the Elysians began to see their world slowly regaining order, a glimpse of hope breaking through years of fear.
On a personal level, the impact of the Deathworlders' arrival could be felt in every corner of Zithara. Families reunited after being trapped for days. Soldiers once on the brink of despair now marched alongside Deathworlder squads. And children who had witnessed the horrors of war were protected and guided to safe zones. The fleet did not merely fight. It stabilized, organized, and restored. The Elysians, who had feared their civilization was doomed, were now experiencing a sense of relief they had not thought possible. The planet was not only defended but being rebuilt in real time, a feat that showcased the Deathworlders' mastery not only of combat but of logistics and care for the weak. The Valkyrie, meanwhile, were forced into retreat. Their forces, once confident and overpowering, now crumbled under the precise, overwhelming presence of the Deathworlders. Attempts to regroup were met with calculated strikes, cutting off escape routes and neutralizing key commanders. The battle that had seemed unwinnable for the Elysians now turned decisively in their favor. The fleet's display of power was absolute, leaving no room for further resistance. The Valkyrie learned that the legends were true. The Deathworlders were unstoppable. And mercy was not granted to those who threatened the weak or innocent, as the immediate threat was neutralized. The Deathworlders began coordinating the recovery phase. They deployed resources to repair critical infrastructure, assist civilians, and restore order to key cities. Drones distributed supplies, medical teams treated the injured, and security units maintained order while rebuilding efforts continued. The Elysians observed with a mix of awe and gratitude. Realizing that these beings were not conquerors in this moment, they were saviors. The scale of their efficiency and coordination was staggering. Cities that had been on the brink of collapse were now being stabilized in days. It's an almost impossible feat by any normal measure. The Elysians slowly emerged from fear into cautious optimism. They saw their homes, their cities, and their way of life being preserved. And for the first time in weeks, they felt a spark of hope. Children who had hidden in basements now played under the watchful eyes of Deathworlder guardians. Families once separated by chaos were reunited. Soldiers and leaders who had been on the verge of surrender now stood with renewed courage. The Deathworlders' arrival had not only repelled the enemy but restored the possibility of survival for the entire civilization. In the end, the arrival of the Deathworlders was more than a military victory, it was a turning point in Zithra's history. It demonstrated the power of precision, strategy, and overwhelming capability, while also showing the potential for mercy and protection. The Elysians witnessed firsthand a species that could wield immense power yet choose to save rather than destroy. The impact of this moment would be remembered for generations. The day that the galaxy's most feared warriors arrived, not to conquer, but to protect a civilization in desperate need. The Deathworlders' arrival was the climax of preparation and journey, their presence reshaping the balance of power and altering the fate of Zithra forever. Every action, every strike, and every decision was executed with precision, leaving no doubt that the legends were true and that hope had finally arrived where it was most needed.